Vice President Biden, the former vice president rather, is now expressing regret over comments made on a popular radio show on Friday, where he said, quote, "If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black." And according to a recent Washington Post op-ed, black voters, especially black women, are a key demographic for Biden in potentially securing victory in November. LaTosha Brown joins me now for more. She's the co-founder of the organization Black Voters Matter. LaTosha, thank you so much for being on. I want to start off by discussing that comment that Biden made on the Breakfast Club radio show. He's coming under fire for suggesting that voters who are undecided between him and Trump aren't black. How did you feel when you heard this, and do you think it could hurt him as his campaign tries to appeal to the black community?
So I think the comment that Vice President Biden made was both reckless and cavalier. And so what I want to lift up is that I think that what he was raising is this issue around Trump being a racist and aligning himself with white supremacists, and that black people, black voters in particular, that we recognize the danger of a Trump, and that we recognize the danger of having a white supremacist in office. And because of our sensitivity to that and our awareness of it, sometimes much greater than our white counterparts, that I do in fact think that's true. However, I also think that either further supports our belief that he needs a vice president, a black vice president, and as a woman, that fundamentally there is a certain level of depthness that he needs in that candidate or in his campaign. There's a certain level of insensitivity that he has about black voters. And I also think that there is an assumption that because he's better than Trump. That may be true, but saying you're better than Trump is a very low bar. That's not a real high bar. And so what black voters are expecting is not just the issue around Trump. In the midst of this pandemic, what is happening to our communities, we've been financially devastated. We're dealing with some of the largest cases in terms of our people dying. And so what is really critical for us right now is this isn't a moment that we can make a comment that is in jest. This is a moment that we want to see a candidate that is going to push forward in our agenda, has the capacity and the depth of experience and knowledge to align themselves to really be able to create and move forward an agenda that is going to best position and advance our community. And so in that comment, I do think it points to a lot of things. I think it talks about a weakness in the campaign around making this assumption that black voters are just automatically going to come out and vote for President Biden. That is not the case. You can't take that for granted, because while people may not vote for Trump, there are folks that will elect to stay home. And so at the end of the day, if we want to win this election, we've got to put everything in it. That you've literally got to energize the base. You've got the constituencies that are actually you're trying to move out, that you've got to speak to them. And you also have to humble yourself and recognize when there is a weakness in your campaign around that particular constituency group.
LaTosha, I hear you getting fired up. It has been a criticism in the past that Democrats take black voters for granted. You and several other women participated in a Washington Post op-ed about why Biden needs specifically black women to win the election. And not just that they won't, that they'll vote potentially for President Trump, but if they stay at home, that he then still has handed the victory to the incumbent. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the things that you believe that Biden really needs to do, and all Democrats really need to do, if they want to actually mobilize black women?
You know, I think there's a couple of things. I think one, when we're talking about participation, black voters are not just participating so that a candidate can win. We're participating because we want to see an improvement in our quality of life. We want to see expansion of economic opportunities in our communities, the advancement of education. We also have an agenda. We have an agenda which we want to see something better for our community and a better outcome. And so I think it's really important in a number of ways that we don't take for granted that our participation, that is it, that the prize is us participating, but that participation leads to power for our community. I think it's also important that the Democratic Party, even when we're talking about swing states and the Midwest, you know, there is not a single swing state that black voters are not key in supporting and in a key constituency base for the Democratic Party. Over and over again, you know, we keep seeing this feel that that black voters have nowhere to go, or that black voters are ultimately have this choice of it's either Trump or not. And so ultimately, we're even engaging in this election cycle is not just about Trump. This election cycle fundamentally for us is about us. It's about, as any other constituency group, We want to make sure that whoever we're voting for has an agenda that that not only includes us, but an agenda that actually meets our desires, our needs, and our demands of what we're raising, that fundamentally will be better for all Americans, what we think. And so I think that that is one piece that even when we're talking about the statement that was made today, that on some level underneath that, it's not just the statement in itself, because I think we all make mistakes and say things, right? But I think what's underneath that is this idea that Black voters can just be taken for granted, that in some way, some form of fashion, that our participation in this process is to the extent that it's just about participation. No, fundamentally, if you want to move Black voters, you've got to give Black voters something to vote for. You've got to give Black voters and people who are really turned off from this process something to believe in that's really fundamentally going to connect to their day-to-day lives, that will improve their day-to-day lives. And that's where I think the missed opportunity is. And so in our op-ed, we talk about three things in particular. We talk about a Black woman as VP, because we think that there are qualified women that actually will bring a tremendous amount of value to the ticket, and energy and excitement and a particular perspective. Secondly, we talk about the Supreme Court, that there's a woman on the Supreme Court, that there's a Black woman on the Supreme Court that really comes out of the third point, which is an agenda that will actually support poor people, the business sector, that our community is not a monolith, that we literally have a spectrum of needs in our community, and we want to make sure that they are centered. Just as we show up for the Democratic Party, we want the Democrats to show up for us.
So, LaTosha, 75% of Black voters, according to a recent Quinnipiac poll, said that they have a favorable opinion of Biden. Do you think that those numbers took a hit with these comments, or do you think that that Black voters are going to give him a pass as long as he continues to show up and do some of the things that you're talking about?
So I certainly don't think that Black voters will give him a pass. I would hope that that's not how we would move forward. I think this comment, I do want to put in perspective, that's one comment on one day. I think the comment in itself, this election season it feels like an eternity, right? And so we're still early in the campaign. I think how he responds going forward, how his campaigns responds to this growing need and demand that there is a Black woman as VP. I think how his campaign responds to who his VP pick is. Is it someone that actually centers Midwestern white voters at the expense of alienating progressive voters and Black voters? I think that as he goes forward, I think that will determine how Black voters come out on this campaign. I think it's important in terms of the agenda. Is his agenda going to be something that was created in the context of his campaign, or will his agenda be something that Black organizations and Black people that are really shaped by folks who have a depth of experience around Black issues and the priority for Black people, and how that's taken in consideration? I think it will be reflective of how he moves forward. So given today and the comments that he's made today, I certainly believe that this is something that has some eyebrows raised, right? And that I do think that there are some folks that are actually looking for something more. We're looking for this campaign to really send a clear and concise message that it values Black voters. Since Black voters were so central to his nomination, for him to be ahead, well, he's not nominated yet, but for him to be ahead in the race, right, and securing the nomination.
Turned around entirely the trajectory. Oh, sorry, to your point, he entirely turned around the trajectory of his campaign because of Black voters in South Carolina. I want to get in one other question, though, that I think is really important. So my apologies for interrupting you, but as you mentioned, and as we've discussed a lot, COVID-19 has disproportionately affected Black and Brown communities. So how is your organization working to make sure that all Americans can safely cast their ballots in November?
So we've been doing, thank you for asking, Black Voters Matter is working in 11 states. And part of what we've been doing is, when you're a good organizer, you know that you've got to meet the needs of what people have right now. Currently, the pandemic is not over. Regardless of what lies the president tell, like the pandemic, we're no closer now than we were 2 months ago in terms of saying that, oh, it's okay and things can be open. And so there's a number of things that we've been doing. One, we've been supporting mutual aid and support in our own communities, and an initiative called Saving Ourselves, so that we can literally be on the front lines and support communities that are most vulnerable, to really be able to give out masks and information, safety. We've got people who are actually giving out food, really to be able to create those those initiatives that we need to support our community in this space right now. We're also looking at our governors and putting pressure on governors and our local officials around making sure that we see policies that to keep us safe, that we just don't open up and say we're open at business as if there are people who are disposable, because we don't believe our community is not disposable. There's no human being that is disposable. And so what's critical for us right now is to make sure that our community is as safe as possible. And then the third element that we've been working on is around voter protection and getting ready for this voter for the elections that are coming up. One, making sure that we're sharing information. We're having community briefings almost weekly throughout the country, throughout the state, with Black voters to hear about some of the issues that they're working with. We're talking to Black voters who are on the front lines that are considered essential workers around some of the pieces that they're working with. And then we're also preparing people to really think differently about this next election cycle, that we're really pushing that people don't have to make a false choice that we saw in Wisconsin of I've got to make a choice of putting my life at risk to cast a ballot, but that we're pushing to expand that every single American should have free and fair access to the ballot without the fear of believing that they will get sick with a disease that could possibly take their lives.
That's right. No person should have to make that decision. LaTosha Brown, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.